I never thought much about the night shift before I started working it. To me, it was just a different set of hours, a way to make a little extra money, maybe even a chance to enjoy some peace and quiet while the rest of the world slept. I'd heard people joke about the graveyard shift, but I figured that was just a play on words, a way to make the job sound more dramatic than it really was. I was wrong. There's something about the world after midnight that changes everything you think you know about your own city, your own workplace, even yourself. The rules are different. The shadows are longer. And the things that go bump in the night, sometimes they're not just in your head. My first night on the job, I was assigned to a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place you'd see in a horror movie. No flickering neon sign, no abandoned pumps, no howling wind. Just a regular, well-lit station with a convenience store attached, a place where truckers and insomniacs stopped for coffee and cigarettes. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Carla, handed me the keys and a list of closing duties. "You'll be fine," she said, but her eyes lingered on me a little too long, as if she was sizing me up for something I didn't understand. "Just keep the doors locked after midnight. And if anyone gives you trouble, call the police. Don't try to be a hero." I laughed it off, but as the clock ticked past midnight and the last customer left, I felt a strange sense of isolation settle over me. The world outside the glass doors seemed to recede, leaving me in a bubble of fluorescent light and humming refrigerators. I busied myself with stocking shelves and wiping down counters, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to press against the windows. Every so often, a car would pull in, headlights sweeping across the parking lot like searchlights. Most of the time, it was nothing, just someone grabbing a snack or filling up their tank. But sometimes, the cars would just sit there, engine idling, the driver's face hidden in the darkness. I learned quickly not to stare, not to make eye contact. You never know what someone might be looking for at 3 in the morning. The first real scare came about a week into the job. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of night where the air feels heavy and the silence is almost physical. I was restocking the cooler when I heard the chime of the front door. I glanced up, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. The door was still locked. I checked the security cameras, but all I saw was the empty parking lot, the pumps standing silent and still. I told myself it was just a glitch, maybe a draft or a loose wire. But then it happened again and again, always at the same time, 2:13 a.m. on the dot. The chime, the empty store, the sense of being watched. I started to dread that minute, counting down the seconds until it passed. I never saw anyone, but I always felt like someone was there, just out of sight. I mentioned it to Carla the next morning, half expecting her to laugh. Instead, she just nodded, her face unreadable. "It happens," she said. "Don't worry about it. Just part of the job." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press her. But from then on, I started to notice other things, little details that didn't make sense. The way the lights would flicker in the back room, even though the bulbs were new. The cold spot by the coffee machine that never seemed to go away, no matter how high I turned up the heat. The way the radio would cut out, static hissing through the speakers, only to snap back to life as if nothing had happened. One night, around 3, a man came in wearing a heavy coat despite the warm weather. He kept his head down, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He didn't buy anything, just wandered the aisles, pausing every so often to glance at the security mirrors. I tried to keep an eye on him without being obvious, but every time I looked away, he seemed to move closer to the counter. Finally, he stopped in front of the register and stared at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Have you ever seen anything strange around here?" he asked, his voice low and rough. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Depends on what you mean by strange. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You'll know it when you see it, he said, and then he left, the bell above the door jangling in the silence. After that, I started to pay more attention to the regulars. There was the old woman who came in every night at exactly 1:17 a.m., always buying the same pack of cigarettes and a single lottery ticket. She never spoke, never smiled, just handed me the money and left. There was the trucker who parked his rig at the far end of the lot, never coming inside, just sitting in the cab with the engine running, staring at the store. And then there were the ones I never saw, but always felt, the sense of eyes on me when I was alone in the back room, the sudden drop in temperature when I walked past the storage closet, the way the shadows seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. I started to keep a journal, jotting down every odd occurrence, every strange customer, every unexplained noise. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, to keep myself sane during the long, lonely hours. But as the weeks went by, the entries started to pile up, each one a little stranger than the last. I found myself looking forward to the weirdness, as if it was a puzzle I could solve if I just paid close enough attention. But the truth is, some things don't have answers. Some things just are. There's a rhythm to the night shift that you only start to understand after you've lived it for a while. The hours stretch and contract in strange ways. Midnight feels like a checkpoint, a line you cross into another world. By 2 or 3, the world outside is so quiet it's almost suffocating, and you start to feel like you're the last person awake on Earth. But then, just before dawn, the city begins to stir again. The first commuters roll through, the sky lightens, and you realize you've survived another night. It's a cycle of tension and relief, fear and boredom, and it does something to your mind. You start to see things differently. You start to notice the cracks in the world. One night, I was mopping the floor near the back of the store when I heard a tapping sound coming from the storage room. It was faint at first, like someone drumming their fingers on a table. I paused, listening, but the sound stopped. I shrugged it off and went back to work, but a few minutes later, it started again, louder this time, more insistent. I set the mop aside and walked to the door, half expecting to find a raccoon or maybe a stray cat that had gotten in somehow. But when I opened the door, the room was empty. The only thing out of place was a single can of soup, rolling slowly across the floor as if someone had just set it down and given it a push. I picked up the can and put it back on the shelf, but the feeling of unease lingered. I checked the security footage later, but all I saw was myself, standing in the doorway, staring into the empty room. No animal, no intruder, nothing. Just me and the shadows. I tried to laugh it off, but the next night, the tapping started again, this time coming from the ceiling above the office. I never found out what caused it, but it became part of the routine, another piece of the night shift puzzle. The regulars became my lifeline. There was a kind of unspoken camaraderie among those of us who kept odd hours. We didn't talk much, but there was a sense of understanding, a shared recognition that we were all a little out of step with the rest of the world. One of my favorites was a janitor named Mike, who worked at the hospital down the street. He'd come in around 4 a.m. for a coffee and a donut, always with a tired smile and a story to share. He told me about the things he'd seen on his rounds: empty wheelchairs rolling down hallways, lights flickering in rooms that were supposed to be empty, the sound of footsteps echoing in deserted corridors. Hospitals are weird at night, he said. You see things you can't explain, but you get used to it. Or you pretend you do. I started to realize that everyone who worked the night shift had stories like that. The security guard at the office park who swore he saw a woman in a white dress wandering the parking lot at 2 a.m., only to have her vanish when he got close. The delivery driver who refused to take the back roads after midnight because of the things he'd seen darting across the highway. Even Carla, who'd been managing the gas station for over a decade, admitted that she kept a crucifix in her office just in case. It was as if the night belonged to a different set of rules, a different set of inhabitants. But not all the dangers were supernatural. Sometimes, the scariest things were the most human. There was the night a man came in, wild-eyed and sweating, demanding to use the phone. He kept glancing over his shoulder, muttering to himself, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the receiver. I let him make his call, but I kept my finger on the panic button under the counter, just in case. He left without incident, but I spent the rest of the night jumping at every sound, convinced he was going to come back. Then there was the time a group of teenagers tried to break in, smashing a window with a rock and laughing as the alarm blared. I locked myself in the office and called the police, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The officers arrived within minutes, but the kids were long gone, leaving behind only shattered glass and a mess to clean up. After that, I started carrying a flashlight with a heavy metal handle, just in case I ever needed to defend myself. The worst, though, was the night I found a man sleeping behind the dumpster. He was thin, his clothes ragged, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed. At first, I thought he was dead. I called out to him, but he didn't move. I edged closer, my breath fogging in the cold air, and finally, he stirred, blinking up at me with a look of pure exhaustion. "You got any food?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I brought him a sandwich and a bottle of water from the store, and he ate in silence, his hands shaking. When he finished, he thanked me and disappeared into the night, leaving me with a sense of helplessness I couldn't shake. It was moments like that that made me realize how invisible the night shift can make you. You see things no one else sees, deal with problems no one else wants to think about. You become a kind of ghost yourself, drifting through the hours while the rest of the world sleeps. It's a lonely existence, but it's also strangely liberating. There's a freedom in being awake when everyone else is dreaming, a sense of ownership over the quiet hours. But the isolation can get to you. I started to notice changes in myself, little things at first, like forgetting what day it was or losing track of time. My sleep schedule was a mess, and I found myself growing irritable, jumpy, always on edge. I started to dread the sound of the chime, the flicker of the lights, the tap-tap-tap from the storage room. I told myself it was just the job, just the hours, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The night was changing me in ways I couldn't quite explain. I started to wonder if maybe the night shift attracted a certain kind of person, or if it simply changed you over time. There was a sense of kinship among those of us who worked through the darkness, but it was a quiet, unspoken bond. We didn't talk about the weird things we saw, not really. We just nodded at each other, shared a tired smile, and went about our business. But every so often, someone would let something slip, a story, a detail, a look in their eyes that said, "You've seen it too, haven't you?" One night, a new security guard named Luis came in for coffee. He was young, maybe early 20s, and still had that fresh, eager look about him. He asked me how I handled the boredom, the long hours with nothing to do. I told him the truth. You get used to it. You find ways to keep your mind busy. But sometimes, it's not the boredom you have to worry about. He laughed, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I wondered how long it would take before the night started to wear on him, too. Luis started coming in more often, sometimes just to talk. He told me about his rounds, the empty office buildings, the echoing hallways, the way the city seemed to hold its breath after midnight. "It's like the world is waiting for something," he said once, his voice barely above a whisper. Like there's something out there, just beyond the edge of the light. I knew exactly what he meant. One night, he came in looking pale and shaken. He said he'd seen a figure standing in the middle of the parking lot at one of his sites, just standing there, not moving. He called out, but the figure didn't respond. When he got closer, it was gone. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Maybe I imagined it, he said, but I could tell he didn't believe that. Neither did I. The stories started to pile up, not just from Luis, but from other night workers, too. The nurse who swore she saw a patient in the hallway, only to remember that the man had died hours earlier. The cab driver who picked up a woman in a white dress, only for her to vanish from the back seat before he reached her destination. The janitor who heard laughter echoing through an empty school, the sound bouncing off the walls long after he was sure he was alone. I started to collect these stories, writing them down in my journal alongside my own experiences. It became a kind of ritual, a way to make sense of the things I couldn't explain. Some nights, I'd read through the entries, looking for patterns, trying to find some logic in the chaos. But the only pattern I found was that the night had a way of revealing things the day kept hidden. There was one story that stuck with me more than the others. It came from a woman named Denise, who worked as a cleaner at an old office building downtown. She was in her 50s, tough as nails, the kind of person who didn't scare easily. But one night, she came in looking rattled. She told me she'd been cleaning the third floor when she heard someone crying in one of the offices. She knocked, but no one answered. When she opened the door, the room was empty, but the crying continued, echoing through the vents. She followed the sound down the hallway, but it always seemed to stay just out of reach. Finally, she gave up and went back to her cart, only to find a single, wet footprint on the tile, small, like a child's. She swore she'd never go back to that floor again. I believed her. By then, I'd seen enough to know that some things just don't have explanations. The night is full of secrets, and sometimes, it's better not to ask too many questions. But not every story was supernatural. Some were just sad, or strange, or unsettling in a different way. There was the man who came in every night to buy a single can of beer, always paying an exact change, never saying a word. One night, he didn't show up, and I found myself worrying about him, wondering if something had happened. The next night, he was back, but he looked different, older, somehow more tired. He didn't say anything, just handed me the money and left. I never saw him again after that. There was the woman who came in with her 2 kids, always late, always looking over her shoulder. She never stayed long, just grabbed a few snacks and hurried out. One night, she lingered at the counter, her hands shaking as she counted out her change. "You ever feel like you're being watched?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded, and she gave me a sad smile before leaving. I never saw her again, either. The night shift is full of people like that. People who slip through the cracks, who live their lives in the margins. You see them at their most vulnerable, their most desperate, their most real. It's a kind of intimacy you don't get during the day, when everyone is busy pretending everything is fine. I started to feel like I was part of a secret club, a society of night people bound together by shared experience. We didn't have a name, or a handshake, or a clubhouse, but we knew each other in the way that only people who have seen the world at its quietest, its loneliest, can know each other. There's a strange comfort in the routines of the night shift, even as the world outside feels unpredictable. I found myself clinging to the little rituals, the way I'd make coffee at exactly 2:30 a.m., the order in which I'd restock the shelves, the habit of double-checking the locks before I took out the trash. These small acts became anchors, something to hold on to when the hours stretched thin and the silence pressed in. But even the best routines can't protect you from everything. One night, a storm rolled in just after midnight. The wind howled around the building, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering across the parking lot. The rain came down in sheets, turning the world outside into a blur of water and shadow. I was alone, as usual, the only light for miles. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights kicked on, casting everything in a sickly red glow. I stood behind the counter, heart pounding, listening to the storm batter the building. I tried to call Carla, but my phone had no signal. The landline was dead, too. I told myself it was just the weather, that the power would come back soon. But as the minutes dragged on, the darkness felt heavier, more oppressive. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the back room, checking the circuit breakers. Everything looked fine, but the lights stayed off. I stood there, listening to the rain, when I heard it, the chime of the front door. I froze. The door was supposed to be locked. I crept back to the front of the store, shining my flashlight into the gloom. The door was closed, but the chime had definitely sounded. I scanned the aisles, looking for any sign of movement, but the store was empty. I checked the security cameras, but with the power out, they were useless. I stood there for a long time, listening to the storm, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, the power came back, the lights flickered on, and the world returned to normal. But I never forgot the feeling of being watched, of being completely alone and completely vulnerable. After that night, I started to take the job more seriously. I paid closer attention to the little things, the way the shadows moved, the sounds the building made, the patterns in the customers who came and went. I started to trust my instincts more, to listen to the little voice in the back of my mind that told me when something wasn't right. It didn't make the job any easier, but it made me feel a little more in control. But the truth is, you're never really in control on the night shift. The world is too big, too strange, too full of things you can't predict. One night, a man came in just before closing, his clothes soaked from the rain. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. He bought a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, then stood at the counter, staring at me. "Do you ever feel like you're the only real person left?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound, and left without another word. I watched him walk out into the rain, his figure swallowed by the darkness. I wondered where he was going, what kind of life he was returning to. I wondered if he'd ever come back. He never did. The nights started to blur together after that. The same faces, the same routines, the same sense of unease. I started to dream about the store, about the endless aisles and the humming lights and the chime of the door. In my dreams, the store was always empty, but I could feel someone or something watching me from the shadows. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced that I'd brought something home with me from the night. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just stress, just lack of sleep. But the feeling lingered, a constant presence at the edge of my awareness. I started to see things out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong, a face in the glass that vanished when I turned to look. I told myself it was nothing, just tricks of the light, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. One night, I was taking out the trash when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised, but the alley was empty. The only sound was the rain dripping from the eaves, the distant hum of traffic. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking. I tried to laugh it off, but the fear stayed with me, a cold knot in my stomach. I started to wonder if maybe the night shift was getting to me, if maybe I was starting to lose my grip. I talked to Mike about it, the janitor from the hospital. He just nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "It happens," he said. "You spend enough time in the dark, you start to see things. Most of the time, it's nothing. But sometimes it's not." I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't want to know. The longer I worked the night shift, the more I realized how much of life happens in the margins, in the hours when most people are asleep and the world feels like it's holding its breath. I started to notice the regulars more, to wonder about their stories. There was a man who always wore a suit, even at 3 in the morning, who bought a single cup of black coffee and sat in his car for an hour before driving away. There was a young woman who came in with a backpack and a notebook, scribbling furiously as she sipped her energy drink, her eyes darting to the windows every few minutes. There was an older couple who walked their dog past the station every night, waving at me through the glass, but never coming inside. I started to invent stories for them, little narratives to fill the gaps. Maybe the man in the suit was a private investigator, waiting for a call that never came. Maybe the woman with the notebook was writing a novel, drawing inspiration from the strange world of the night. Maybe the couple with the dog were insomniacs, finding comfort in the quiet streets. It was a way to pass the time, to make the hours feel less empty. But sometimes, the stories wrote themselves. One night, the woman with the notebook came in looking more anxious than usual. She bought a bottle of water and lingered at the counter, glancing over her shoulder. "Do you have a phone I can use?" she asked, her voice trembling. I handed her the store phone, and she dialed a number with shaking hands. I tried not to listen, but I couldn't help overhearing snippets of the conversation, something about someone following her, about not feeling safe. When she hung up, she thanked me and hurried out, disappearing into the night. I never saw her again. It's moments like that stick with you, the little glimpses into other people's lives. You start to realize how much fear and loneliness there is in the world, how many people are just trying to make it through the night. The night shift strips away the masks people wear during the day, leaving only the raw, unfiltered truth. But the night also has its moments of beauty. There were times when the world outside was so still, so peaceful, that it felt like I was the only person alive. I'd stand at the window, watching the rain fall or the snow drift down, the city lights twinkling in the distance. There was a kind of magic in those moments, a sense of being part of something bigger than myself. The night can be terrifying, but it can also be beautiful in its own quiet way. I started to appreciate the small things, the way the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the sound of birds starting to sing, the feeling of relief when the day shift arrived and I could finally go home. I learned to savor the quiet, to find comfort in the routines, to accept the things I couldn't explain. But the job was taking its toll. My sleep was a mess, my appetite all over the place. I started to feel disconnected from the rest of the world, like I was living in a different reality. My friends stopped inviting me out. My family stopped calling as often. I missed birthdays, holidays, important moments. The night shift demands sacrifices, and sometimes it feels like you're giving up more than you're getting in return. I tried to keep my spirits up, to remind myself why I took the job in the first place. The extra money was nice, and there was a certain pride in being able to handle the hours, the isolation, the weirdness. But some nights, it felt like too much. I'd find myself staring at the clock, willing the minutes to pass, counting down the hours until sunrise. One night, I was restocking the cooler when I heard a voice behind me. "You look tired," it said. I turned, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. I checked the cameras, but there was no one there. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the exhaustion playing tricks on me. But the feeling lingered, a sense of being watched, of not being alone. I started to wonder if maybe the night shift was changing me, if maybe I was becoming one of the ghosts that haunted the store. I felt invisible, untethered, drifting through the hours like a shadow. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the tasks at hand, but the feeling wouldn't go away. One morning, as I was leaving the store, I caught my reflection in the glass. I barely recognized myself, pale, hollow-eyed, a stranger in my own skin. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection, wondering who I was becoming. The night shift has a way of stripping you down, of revealing the parts of yourself you'd rather keep hidden. But it also teaches you things about resilience, about empathy, about the strength it takes to keep going when the world feels dark and empty. I started to see the night shift as a kind of test, a challenge to be met, a journey through the shadows. And in the end, I realized that maybe that's what the night is for, not just to scare us, but to show us what we're made of. As the months wore on, I found myself growing more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the night. I could tell when a storm was coming by the way the air felt, heavy and electric. I could sense when a customer was in trouble before they even opened their mouth, just by the way they moved or the look in their eyes. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the little voice that told me when to be cautious, when to lock the doors, when to keep my head down and wait for the danger to pass. But there were still nights that caught me off guard, nights when the world seemed to tilt on its axis and nothing made sense. One of those nights started like any other, quiet, uneventful, the hours crawling by. Around 3 a.m., a car pulled into the lot, headlights off. I watched from behind the counter as a man got out, moving slowly, deliberately. He wore a hooded sweatshirt, his face hidden in shadow. He didn't come inside right away, just stood by the pumps, staring at the store. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he stood there, so still, so silent, set off every alarm in my head. I reached for the phone, ready to call the police if I had to. After a few minutes, he finally came inside, his movements slow and deliberate. He wandered the aisles, picking up items and putting them back, never looking directly at me. When he finally approached the counter, he placed a single bottle of water on the register and stared at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You ever get the feeling you're being watched?" he asked, his voice low and rough. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Sometimes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You should trust that feeling," he said. "Sometimes it's the only thing keeping you safe." He paid for the water and left, disappearing into the night. I watched him go, my heart pounding, the sense of unease lingering long after he was gone. I never saw him again, but his words stuck with me, echoing in my mind during the long, lonely hours. After that, I started to take extra precautions. I double-checked the locks, kept the lights on in the parking lot, made sure I always had my phone within reach. I started carrying a small can of pepper spray, just in case. The night shift teaches you to be careful, to be prepared for anything. But it also teaches you that sometimes, no matter how careful you are, things can still go wrong. There was the night a car crashed into the ditch across the street, the driver stumbling into the store, blood streaming down his face. I called 911, tried to keep him calm until the paramedics arrived. He kept muttering about someone chasing him, about headlights in the rearview mirror that wouldn't go away. The police said he was probably just in shock, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Or the night a woman came in, her clothes torn, her face streaked with tears. She said she'd been walking home when a car started following her, creeping along the curb, matching her pace. She ducked into the store, begging me to let her stay until the car was gone. I locked the doors, kept her company until she felt safe enough to leave. She thanked me, her hands still shaking, and disappeared into the night. These moments reminded me that the night shift isn't just about ghosts and shadows. It's about real people, real danger, real fear. The world doesn't stop being dangerous just because the sun goes down. If anything, the darkness makes everything feel more immediate, more intense. But there were good moments, too. The regulars who brought me coffee, the truckers who shared stories from the road, the quiet camaraderie of people who understood what it meant to be awake when everyone else was asleep. There was a sense of community, a sense that we were all in this together, facing the darkness side by side. I started to find comfort in the routines again, in the small acts of kindness that made the nights a little easier. I kept a stash of snacks behind the counter for the homeless man who sometimes slept behind the dumpster. I learned how to make the perfect cup of coffee for Mike, the janitor who always appreciated the effort. I started leaving the radio on low, the soft hum of music filling the silence. The night shift changed me in ways I never expected. It made me more cautious, more aware, but also more compassionate. I learned to see the world through different eyes, to appreciate the beauty in the quiet moments, the strength in surviving the hard ones. I learned that fear isn't always a bad thing, that sometimes it's what keeps you alive. And I learned that no matter how dark the night gets, the sun always rises. The world keeps turning, the city wakes up, and life goes on. The night shift is a world unto itself, full of secrets and stories and lessons you can't learn anywhere else. There's a moment, just before dawn, when the world feels suspended between two realities. The sky is still dark, but there's a hint of light on the horizon, a promise that the night is almost over. It's the loneliest time, and also the most hopeful. I'd stand at the window, watching the first streaks of color bleed into the sky, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift. The city would start to wake up, delivery trucks rumbling down the street, the first early risers stopping in for coffee, the day shift arriving with tired smiles and fresh energy. I'd hand over the keys, offer a few words of warning or advice, and step out into the cool morning air, grateful to have made it through another night. But even as the sun rose and the world returned to normal, the memories of the night lingered. I'd carry them with me as I walked home, the echoes of strange voices, the flicker of shadows, the faces of people I'd never see again. I'd try to sleep, but sometimes the dreams would come, dreams of empty aisles and humming lights, of footsteps in the dark, of doors that opened when they shouldn't. I'd wake up with my heart racing, the sense of unease clinging to me like a second skin. Over time, I learned to live with it. The fear, the loneliness, the uncertainty, they became part of the job, part of who I was. I stopped trying to explain the things I'd seen, stopped looking for answers that would never come. I accepted that the night had its own rules, its own logic, its own way of revealing the truth. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the little voice that told me when to be careful, when to run, when to hide. I learned that sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is your own sense of caution. But I also learned that the night isn't all darkness. There's beauty in the quiet, in the stillness, in the moments of connection that happen when the rest of the world is asleep. There's a kind of honesty that comes out in the small hours, a willingness to be vulnerable, to share fears and hopes and secrets with strangers who might never cross your path again. I found comfort in those moments, in the knowledge that I wasn't alone, that there were others out there facing the same darkness, fighting the same battles. I think about the people I met, the regulars, the lost souls, the ones who came and went without a word. I wonder where they are now, what stories they're living, what secrets they're keeping. I wonder if they remember me, the night clerk at the gas station, the one who listened, who offered a smile, who tried to make the night a little less frightening. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I remember them. If there's one thing the night shift taught me, it's that everyone is carrying something: fear, pain, hope, regret. You see it in their eyes, in the way they move, in the things they don't say. The night strips away the pretense, leaving only the truth. And sometimes, that truth is hard to face. But it's also what makes us human. I don't work the night shift anymore. I moved on, found a job with regular hours, a life that fits more neatly into the rhythms of the day. But I still think about those nights, about the lessons I learned, about the person I became. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain that I heard the chime of the door, the tap of footsteps, the whisper of a voice calling my name. I remind myself that it's just a memory, just a dream. But part of me wonders if the night ever really lets you go. So if you ever find yourself working the night shift, remember this: trust your instincts. Pay attention to the little things. Be kind to the people who cross your path, because you never know what they're going through. And don't be afraid of the darkness. It's just another part of the world, another side of the story. There's beauty in it, if you know where to look. And if you ever hear the chime of the door at 2:13 a.m., or see a shadow move where there shouldn't be one, or feel the weight of eyes watching you from the darkness, don't ignore it. The night has its secrets, and sometimes it's trying to tell you something. Listen, learn, survive. And when the sun finally rises, step out into the light with the knowledge that you made it through, that you faced the darkness and came out the other side. That's what no one warned me about. But now, I'm warning you.